Hey everyone, I'm Dylan. Sorry. So for my video, I'm gonna have to use it for my phone. My computer has been acting up with like the quality and stuff, and I can't share through Zoom, so I'm just gonna use iMovie. But what I just wanted to get through first was that I'm doing chapter 19. I'm going to explain everything on the slides. I'm going to speak over it. So this is the only time you're really going to see me, so I just want to explain this. So I did chapter 19. I'm going to cover more of chapter 19.3. So yeah, I just wanted to explain that. And yeah, I hope you guys learned something today. And enjoy the rest of the video. So for my project, I selected Microeconomics project chapter 19. I'm going to be covering more of chapter 19.3. But yeah, so now I'm going to get into the next part. So for this project, I decided to do chapter 19, but focuses more on 19.3, which is what, in parentheses, if anything is wrong with inequality. And based on this, the subchapters, you'll be able to assume that the entire chapter 19 focuses mainly on inequality on the world. Chapter 19 also dives into taxes, but it's primarily the entire chapters on equality and inequality in the world. But for this, I'm going to try and focus more towards the United States because the examples in the book represented those more, and obviously it's all from an economic standpoint. So my next slide is how I'll be presenting this. So as seen on my outline, which I turned in separately, I will be going over the two subsections, which are the first one is perceived ideal and actual inequalities, and then the second one is why is inequalities unfair. They're both in 19.3. So I will be explaining both of them in depth, and I have a slide for each paragraph underneath the subsections and the main points of each paragraph. So how I will be doing this is, for example, for the perceived ideal and actual inequalities, each paragraph I kind of go through and take out the main points that are the most vocal throughout everything, and I'm going to go into depth with them. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy and learn something today. So the first slide underneath perceived ideal and actual inequalities, the first bullet point says, in November 2016, students at the beginning of economics at Humboldt University, in parentheses, in Berlin, were asked, in quote, what is the most pressing issue that economics today should address? So the next bullet is, in the image below that I will put in, which is obviously right there with the picture, is the words that all these students believe that they should address. And I thought it was super interesting. So the reason I thought it was super interesting is, obviously, as you look at it, you can tell that the biggest word in it is inequality. And this entire chapter kind of is focused on inequality in the economic world. So I thought that was super interesting that even students knew that inequality was one of the most pressing issues. If you also look into it, you can see, where is it? Basic income, which we kind of cover as well. There is also ethics. You can tell ethics is in it by some information I am going to give. Poverty is definitely in it if you pay attention. And redistribution of wealth. These are also, those are main points within this chapter, and I just thought it was super interesting, along with sustainability. So the fact that students even thought inequality was important shows that this chapter is very important to learn about. So for the next slide, the first bullet says, one of the reasons why inequality is seen as a problem is that too many people think that there is too much of it. So this can go either way. People can believe that there's not that much inequality in the world, but also people can believe there is very much inequality. So this is a good point for both sides. The next point says, Michael Noren, a professor of business administration, and Dan Ariely, a psychologist and behavioral economist, asked a large sample of Americans how they thought wealth of the U.S. should be distributed. So below, next, is the survey that the information they got. So the top bar shows that Americans thought that, ideally, the rich 20% should own a little more than 30% of the wealth. Some inequality in this was desirable, but not a lot. So that means that people thought the richest 20% should own more than 30 of the total wealth. In contrast with the fourth bar, which is estimated, which you'll see in the next slide where the graph is shown, which shows that they thought the richest 20% owned about 60 wealth. So they thought that the richest 20% owned about 60% of the total wealth. In the bottom bars, in reality, the richest fifth owns 85% of the wealth. And finally, the actual distribution is more equal than the public's estimate, which means that the actual distribution of wealth is more unequal than the public estimates. And then in contrast sharply with the lower inequality people would like to see. So in this slide, you can see that the graph that I was explaining from the slide previously, on the left, you can see it says ideal income greater than 100,000, ideal income less than 50,000, the estimated and actual. So on the bottom, you can see the 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%, which is, the title is wealth owned by the indicated quintile. So that just explains what people believe the percentage-wise. And then at the top, you can see the colors where the blue was the top 20%, the red was the second 20%, green was the middle 20%, purple was fourth 20%, and then the orange was the bottom 20%. So for the next slide, the first bullet says different groups largely agree on the ideal distribution of wealth, which means that different groups may disagree, but different groups agree a good amount on the ideal distribution of wealth. Second bullet says Americans with an annual income of greater than 100,000 thought that the share going up to the top 20% should be slightly larger than those who earned less than 50,000 thought it should be. So what that means is that the group who earned income greater than 100,000 thought that the share for the top 20% should be slightly larger than those with less than 50,000 thought it should originally be. So, for example, I used this example that was in the book, and I thought it was good for especially the time we're in with the presidential debate voting coming up soon. It says Democratic Party voters wish that more equal distribution than Republican voters. So if you're paying attention now, especially with the campaign going on, you understand that. And another example is women preferred more equality than men did, and with history that they did. So that's also a very good point. And then finally, the differences between these groups were, however, small. So yes, these differences may be very small, but there's also a lot of similarities. But these are also two main vocal points representing these facts. So now we are getting into the second subsection, which is called When is Inequality Unfair? So the first bullet says, although there seems to be consensus on the ideal outcome of the U.S., policies that would redistribute income and wealth are controversial and debated passionately, as they are in most countries. So what this means is that the consensus on the entire population typically agrees on the ideal outcome of the U.S., but policies redistribute the income wealth, and it's a very controversial and debated passionately, as they are in most countries in the world. The second bullet point says differences in self-interest contribute in arguments, which means that self-interest are basically your own opinion. So self-interest of certain things, they're going to be a huge contributor in arguments. So, for example, richer Americans oppose redistribution while poor Americans support. And this is a great example of the self-interest. So the richer has a self-interest of opposing redistribution and not really giving money to the poor side, while the poorer Americans want to gain more money. So for the next slide, the first bullet says self-interest is just a part of explanation. People defer because they have other beliefs, which means that self-interest is just a part of explaining yourself, but also people will defer your point almost because they have other beliefs on the subject, which is typical in almost anything. And then secondly, that in laboratory settings, people often express feelings of fairness and give up considerable sums amount of money to ensure that the outcomes are consistent with ideas of economic justice. Which that means is that in a laboratory setting, which is like surveys, almost like questions, people want to express a strong feeling of fairness and not bias towards something, and a consistency with ideas of economic justice. So for this slide, the first one is example. Responders in the ultimatum game reject what they consider an unfair offer, preferring to receive nothing and to impose the same fate on the prosper, then agree to be treated unfairly. So what this means is that responders, they consider to be treated get an unfair offer, preferring nothing but to be treated equal, and they don't want to. People agree to being treated unfairly, but they would rather have an even ground and be all treated fairly. Secondly, both the rich and poor may have high levels of inequality, are unfair, and that the government should reduce economic disparities, even if that means voting for policies that would reduce the disposable income of voters. So what this means is that both the poor and rich think there are many high levels of inequality and unfair for both sides, and the government should just reduce economic disparities. So in this slide, Christina Fong, an economist, wanted to know if people in the U.S. think this way when it comes to their political support or opposition to policies to raise the income of the poor, financed by general taxation. She found that a person who thinks that hard work and risk-taking are essential to economic success is more likely to support redistribution to the poor than the ones who think that the key to success is inheritance, being white, your connections, or who your parents are. She found that white people who think being white is important to getting ahead strongly support redistribution. They think this because the process that determines economic success is unfair. So basically what she's saying is she did almost like a survey to see where you fell on the spectrum of the hard work or risk taking or your inherence being whites, like such and such. So her finding that people who thought that being white was important to getting ahead strongly support redistribution. So she found that, and her statements are correct, that they followed along the survey, and her survey seemed to work out pretty well. And you'll be able to see on the slide next where it shows the graph. So in this graph, you're able to see that if you read the bottom, beliefs about what it takes to get ahead in life. So if you read, it says gender matters, male, race matters, white, education matters, parents matters, connection matters, luck matters, dishonesty matters, inheritance matters, race matters, black, gender matters, female, or risk-taking matters, or hard work matters. And then on the far right, you can see that the arrows going below is opposition to redistribution, and the arrows going up is support for redistribution. And on the side, you can see extent to support or opposition to redistribution, and it's the negative 0.15 and so on. So yeah, this graph is very good, and I received a lot of knowledge from it as well. So for the conclusion, which kind of dives into more is inequality unfair, but also dives into the first half. This suggests that for many people, in quotes, how much inequality is too much can't technically be answered unless we know if the family is either rich or poor. People believe that it is unfair if income depends substantially on what they call accident of birth, which consists of your race, sex, or country. Inequalities based on hard work or even taking risks are not likely at all to be a problem. So what this is saying that you can't necessarily tell how much inequality is too much because you don't know much about their family, but people believe it's unfair if you're just kind of stereotyping certain people, which is the accident of birth. So finally, now I have 3 questions for everyone. So the first one is, if you refer back to the first slide, how do you think U.S. wealth is distributed? And if you didn't know any of the info I gave you in the first slide, which was the one when people said that the 20% should have got 30% and so on and so on. The second one, if you were able to decide how the wealth was distributed in the United States, what would you propose to do? So basically what I'm asking is, if you knew nothing about the first slide and you were able to say, like, you were the one who was able to distribute the wealth, how would you do it? And third, how do you believe inequality is unfair and why? And that is all I have. Thank you for listening to my chapter and the work I have done. I hope you were able to learn something while I presented. I really enjoyed doing this project, and I hope you guys stuck around to watch to the end. Everyone have a great day. Thank you.